Hello everyone and welcome back to another video and another sketchbook tour. So as for a background on this sketchbook tour, I'm currently working on a larger project of painting different wildlife and plant illustrations for some information boards about local habitats here in Germany. And to prepare for this and learn more about some of the species, I'm creating these study pages in my sketchbook. So these are usually several small studies of the same species and preferably from different angles and with additional details and notes and more information, and sometimes or very often also color. And I've tried to take the time for these studies for this project because it really helps me. It's also a lot of fun to do, although often I just have to get the illustration done. And this is what I've mainly been doing in the last 2 months, and I will continue to do for a little while longer, so you'll probably see more of this. So, of course, many of these species that I sketched here are not in the right season. So, despite my usual working methods, I mostly worked from photo references and not from any live plant or animal. And this has its downsides, but working with live specimen is often not possible for these kind of natural history illustration projects, as there's usually a deadline. And since these are local species, I already have a lot of plans for more research and sketching hikes in the next year. And the project will be finished by then, but I really want to see some of the local orchids and butterflies that I had to explore and get to know here. And now I also know where to find them. There was an interesting side effect of these detailed studies on each page, and these have led to a very consistent sketchbook, more than usual. I like really almost every page in this sketchbook so far, which isn't always the case with my more experimental sketchbooks and more spontaneous nature studies. And if you've followed me for a while, you know I'm a big proponent of experimenting and allowing and even inviting failed pages into your sketchbook. But I have to say, I also enjoy leafing through this sketchbook and seeing that every page is sort of nice. And I miss sketching just for myself and exploring new things and new techniques. But learning more about these habitats and species has also been very, very rewarding. And seeing these beautiful pages unfold has also been really, really nice. So I've been using this huge sketchbook. This is a self-made sketchbook. It's 20 by 25 centimeters, and it's an absolute joy to use at this size. I've been thinking about just using A4 sized spiral pads from now on, which is only slightly larger than this, but I'll have to see if I can get them with decent paper. Currently I'm using up a cotton paper, which is Hanemühle Expression, and since this is a self-made sketchbook, I often use up papers that I don't quite like to use for other work. And for sketching, it's okay. It's a cold-pressed cotton paper, but it's nothing that I would buy again in larger quantities. So I find it to be often a bit too woolly, and then it has these this weird texture, these weird streaks that I don't enjoy when doing washes. So on to the individual pages, I would say. We will start with this Alpine Nude. We actually encountered this one while we were hiking this year, and it was really interesting creature to watch and to observe. These are usually living in these sort of moist forest areas. They are very slow. They tolerate cameras being pointed at them and pictures taken. And of course, I exploited this a little bit and took a lot of pictures. And I particularly like this faint dark on dark pattern, this almost invisible pattern on the side of the animal. And on the right side, we have one of my favorite finches. This is a goldfinch. And these two visited my balcony this year, and I took the opportunity for some detailed sketches. So these were two individuals, one with familiar red face mask and one with a slightly duller gray-brown plumage. And this is a juvenile bird, so they don't have the face mask yet. And they enjoyed shredding away the seeds of my flowers here. And yeah, probably the adult bird taught the juvenile bird how to feed on these. And they were really staying quite a long while, and they didn't mind the camera either. So here begin the sketches that I did for my project and for the illustrations. And so these are sand lizards. I didn't encounter them in the wild this year, but I had a lot of photographs, and they're always a bit shy and disappear quickly. So you have to be careful when you want to photograph them. And so I was happy to have references. And with reptiles, I find it's always a challenge to get all of these details and the scale structure right. So for these sketches, I allowed myself to take a loose approach, and for the later illustration, I went into a bit more detail. On the right side, you can see an orchid, and this will actually take a bit longer to explain. So wild orchids are one of the most fascinating and most loved flowers among naturalists. And many people aren't really aware that we have local wild orchids in Europe that grow in our fairly moderate climate. And these are not the tropical plants that you buy in supermarkets and put on your windowsill. So these grow just on meadows on the outside, and you can see some of them look a little bit similar. And yeah, I had a very serious phase where I was sort of an orchid hunter in my youth, which is not to be taken literally, because you just look at them, you don't take them with you. They're protected plants, and you shouldn't take them out of nature to back with you home. That's actually prohibited. And anyway, so I was pretty crazy about them when I was younger, and then with this project, my love for these really unique plants has been rekindled lately. And the one that I sketched here is called a bee orchid of the Orchids genus. And I really had a fun time with all the details on the lip of the blossom. So this big brown part here. And this can really be very quite different within the same species of orchid. But I really had a good time figuring out all of the different patterns. So here we have another nice spread with orchids, and there are two different kinds. Another Orchids orchid is the late spider orchid, and these kinds of orchids are really very special. There are other kinds that I will show in a minute, but these types of orchids actually mimic insects, so they are involved so that the flowers look and feel and smell like a female insect of a certain species. And male insects of that species will then approach the flower and try to copulate with it, and that way they pollinate the flower. And this is actually a very effective technique, because studies indicate that this kind of specialization works better than just offering nectar to a wide variety of pollinators. So the names of the orchids are not always connected to the insect species that they rely on. Sometimes they just are named for what they look like. So this is, in English, it's a late spider orchid. And the German name is actually bumblebee orchid, and the pollinator for this one is a certain bee species. So it's sometimes a little bit unclear what orchid and insect belong together. But they're really a fascinating type of flower to explore, and I really, really love these. Here on the right side, we have another interesting orchid that's really, really beautiful too, and it's unique in itself. It's the lady slipper, and as you can see, it has a bright, bulgy lip here that's formed like a huge yellow slipper, and this is where the name comes from. And what I particularly loved about this species was exploring these long, twisted petals with this beautiful purple-brown color. And I used Perylene Maroon for this, which is just the perfect pigment for this color. So this was really fun to learn about the plant and then also sketch it. And as you can see, I tried out different kinds of annotation systems, and I find the fountain pen annotations with this light yellow or light ochre color a bit more interesting than the pencil notes. But of course, it always depends on how much time I have and what pen is in the vicinity. And another field that I started studying more seriously this year are these meadow butterflies. And these are small, often blue or brown butterflies, and they can be really hard to identify. And I set out to learn more about them this last year. And it's a wonderful process getting to know them through the sketching and through photographs. And most of these butterflies live in the same areas as the orchids, so you can sort of look at both at the same time. And on this page, it was really just fun exploring the different colors and putting the butterflies into a sort of loose layout, and then just having fun with these butterfly creatures. And on the right side we have another orchid, and this time it's the military orchid or helmet orchid, and this is named so because of the sepals and petals grouped together like a helmet, so they close like this sort of helmet structure. And this one is actually quite common, and it's also quite large. It's up to 50 centimeters in height. And it was very fun to draw and to explore this helmet flower, and also very time consuming, as you can see here. I'm really not that into the paper. It doesn't allow for very detailed sketches. Here's another spread with beautiful meadow and field flowers. So on the left side there's the German Gentian, and this is another rare plant that can be found in special habitats. And despite the name German Gentian, it can be found across Europe. So I really love the intense violet color of this flower. So I used cobalt violet for this, and this is just a perfect match for it. I don't use cobalt violet very often because I don't really enjoy the granulation too much, particularly for these botanical sketches. But the color is just a very good argument in this case. And then on the right side, we have one of the most common herbs in our local meadows here, and this is wild oregano. And it's also called Dost in German, which is sort of to set it apart from the southern oregano, so the Italian or Greek variety of this herb. And it's a favorite plant for butterflies, and it often grows in these large cushion-like patches. I went for a slightly more informal landscape sketch here to see what a habitat illustration could look like. And when I'm not in a protected area, then I like to take a few flower heads of this herb back with me and home. And it's great for tea and on pizza and pasta and stuff like that. So it's really delicious as well. So that's part 1 of this sketchbook tour. I will continue this with the part 2. I did actually so many of these detail studies that it would, I think, overload one single video. So I hope you enjoyed these outtakes so far, and leave me a comment or a like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see part 2 and if you haven't already. And if you want to support my work, then take one of my classes. It's your support that makes these videos and projects possible. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!